Hello, I'm Mina Shamali, and welcome to the first episode of Studio Space. Today's topic is having fun with Reverb. So, in this first episode, I want to specifically look at Altiverb. This is a convolution reverb plugin that's been around for a number of years now, but I only really started paying attention to it recently. And, over the last year or so, I saw what it could do, and it kind of blew me away. Just the sheer possibility and the potential and the features and that kind of thing. And being a lover of big acoustic spaces myself, I think a lot of people, almost everybody is, but I get into this large, beautiful acoustic space, and I immediately think, what could I record in here? Could record an orchestra or a choir or pianos or guitars. Guitars are beautiful in these spaces. And I can't always do that. So I'm a big fan of convolution reverbs because they're almost the closest thing to that within this space. So I contacted the guys at Audio Ease who produced Altiverb, and they kindly sent me a copy to check out and have a look at what it does through the series. So here we go. I'll quickly bring up the website because this plugin comes in two versions: the regular and the Excel. So the regular goes for about $600, and the Excel goes for about $995. Now, they actually sent me the Excel, which I'm very grateful for. Just unfortunately, I can't really use much of the Excel features at the moment because I'm not equipped for surround sound, and I don't use Pro Tools almost at all. I've used it a few times, but I don't use it natively because Cubase is my DAW of choice. And the sampling rates are up to 384 kilohertz, which I just work at 48. I'm happy, and my clients are happy, so I'm cool. So basically most of what I'm looking at here is the regular. Now, so that's almost $600, which might seem steep for a plugin, but considering that stuff in the high end, like the Lexicon, which is about $600, and the VSL MIR Pro is about 500 euros, those high end convolution things, that seems to be par for the course. The other thing is that you will almost always need reverb in every project. So this becomes an investment that can make itself back quickly over a couple of projects, and there you go. You've made just depends on what the project is, I suppose. But you will always need reverb for the most parts in most cases. So it's a very worthy investment. Now, up to this point, I'd been using East-West Spaces. I'd been using it for a number of years, and because it was kind of simple. And reverb can be as fun or as tedious as you want to make it, or choose to make it. And for a few years, I just made reverb fun, and I just used Spaces, which was simple and beautiful and everything. And sometimes you want to do more with it, and while Spaces is excellent, Altiverb seemed to do something really, a lot more expansive. So let's have a look at it here. I've got it opened here through Cubase. I'm currently working on Cubase 8.5. Haven't upgraded to 9 yet, but that's okay. It doesn't really affect what I'm doing here. The point of view I want to take for this is mostly having fun playing virtual instruments with Altiverb, because a lot of the time you open up a preset and it's very dressed up. Any sample library or a synth or something like Omnisphere, which is a combination of the two. And it's very dressed up in reverb and delays and all these effects and that kind of thing. And when you start stripping back the reverb, you then listen to the original sample. And if the original sample is really good, then it will take really well to the processing. But sometimes the processing is there to hide the flaws of the original. So I try to use as many high quality sound sources as possible, and hopefully the processing just becomes icing on what is already a beautiful cake. Man, I want cake now. So this is what I'll do. So I'll basically play a bunch of instruments and see how Altiverb plays with it, and I'll go through all these different features and how I like to use them. So I'll start off with Alicia Keys here, because I really like this piano, and being piano is my primary instrument. Now my latency is a bit up because I'm recording everything, but for the most part, I don't know, it's a really nice all-rounder, and it really does the sympathetic resonance really well for me. So that's almost one of the most important things for me in playing a sampled piano, is the sympathetic resonance and how it responds, and that's why I really like Alicia Keys. So if you play it bone dry here, so you can really hear that resonance in there, and you can probably turn it up even more. But pianos can be like that. But if you play them just staccato kind of thing, you can hear kind of the bone dry environment that it was recorded in. And sometimes with pianos, because pianos a lot of the time are featured up front and center, it's really cool to just add a touch of reverb. So we'll use Altiverb in that way first. Now I've got here Altiverb open, which has a beautiful interface, and I've got this preset which is from a church. So if you have a look here, you can look at all these different places. So concert halls, religious studio recording, opera theater, and then for post-production stuff, which is fantastic, and then a whole bunch of gear and fun sound design stuff. And you can even put your own stuff in there. So for this example, I went. I like this little browser; it's fantastic. For this example, I went with a church. Most of these religious venues are churches, although there's a couple of other things. But it has a nice long tail, which can be fun. And I'm using it with the mix knob here. So this is just as insert effect, use it as a mix. So if I turn it all the way down, this is what it is dry. We'll turn it up a little bit. Turn it up even more, actually. So I'll play some soft stuff. So that's really nice, especially when you hear the staccato. So yeah, with pianos, you're featuring them up front and center. But it's not just what you can do. So if I have it here as an insert, there's a lot of control over what you can do. And that I really, really enjoy that amount and that level of control. Because it's... I don't know how to describe it, but it's... You can really dig into the sound and clean. Now, some people have said that Altiverb is a bit muddy and maybe too much low end, and therefore if you use Altiverb, your whole mix starts to sound muddy. I really think that's down to you and your mixing skills and your how you clean it up. And Altiverb actually provides a lot of ways to really clean up your reverb, but kind of seems to preserve the spirit of the natural space. So if I say, for example, I'll listen to this reverb. Now I'm thinking maybe it needs to sparkle a little more. One of the beautiful things they have here is this little brightness knob. Now I'm not sure exactly what it's doing, because it's not just simply a reverb or an EQ or anything, but it seems to kind of work instantaneously. So this is what it sounds like now, and then I'll put it up. Now it brightens it up considerably. It could be really interesting here. So immediately the brightness thing really does a great job. There's control over the reverb time, which if we've got, this is about 7.5 seconds. And if I put it down, this is about 2 seconds to 1.5. No, what am I saying? I'm not doing my math right. But so this is a single space, and I could put it all the way up 150%. It's nice. So this is just, again, one impulse response. And there's a size control here. Now let me put this back. If you press Alt, I'm on Windows, so you press Alt and it just brings things back to normal. Now, there's a size control here. It seems to me, and I might be wrong, but it seems to me that what it's doing is retuning the impulse responses. So if I put the size... So if you have listened to it now, if I put the size down, it kind of feels like it's shortened it. It's shortened the time, but it's also pitched up. If you can hear the reflections, pitched up the reflections, and kind of reduced the size of the space a little bit. Now, if I put the size all the way up to 200%, oops. It feels like the whole thing pitched down a little bit. And obviously these are extreme measures, but that could be interesting if you want to be more subtle about it. And maybe retune your reflections. Why not? So maybe I might want to tune this down a little bit. So I'll put this... It'll increase the time a little bit. Go up to 139. And if I think it's too long, just put the reverb time down a little bit. So in a sense, I've maintained most of the length of the original IR and then tuned it down. That's, I don't know, I don't think I've seen that in another effect. I'm probably wrong. It probably exists in other things, but I haven't actually seen it. This is the first time I've really seen that kind of level. It's never been like, because I think usually it's been stretching the sample rather than pitching it up or down. I may be wrong. I may be completely wrong. I don't know the engineering behind these plugins, but I do know how they sound, and I do know how I like to use them. So let's put the size back. Let's put the reverb time back. And the other parameter here, I really like the sheer amount of control. You can have control over the direct signal, the early reflections, and the tail completely separately, and almost turn whatever you want off. Now, I know a lot of convolution plugins will offer you that, but I haven't really used that many. So this for me is beautiful, but just the amount of control that is available, plus the sound, the way it sounds. So say, for example, here, if I turn off the early reflections in the tail, you'll just hear it bone dry. If I hear the early reflections, which if you put the mix up. So these are the early reflections off the closest walls of the space. And then the tail is everything else. I can control the level of each, which is fantastic. So if in fact, I could just use the tail if I wanted to. Now, obviously, it's really a mixing thing if you want, and sometimes it might be a tone thing, but sometimes you might not want all those early reflections. But those early reflections plus the tail are really what make the sound, because the tail will be all the other reflections of the rest of the space, but the early reflections will give you the sense of the space and how far off it is from its nearest walls, and that's really interesting to me anyway. So yeah, just that's some good amount of control. And here I haven't even gone beyond one single venue yet, one single IR. And the cool thing is I love the EQ controls here and the damping controls. So if I look at the EQ, I can very quickly. It's the same now. It's the same amount here. These correspond. So if I can brighten it up here with the treble. And these two are kind of free in the middle. So you can EQing the reverb is a really cool thing, and I would advise it as a general mixing technique. Especially here. Now, these the bass and the low mids, that's where a lot of the muddiness seems to happen. So sometimes you want to clean up the muddiness and control it. This is where you go as a point of reference within the plugin itself. So dry and with the mix. And so you can have just a bright reverb. So that's a lot of potential for each one. And also I love the Q control here, so the resonance control, the bandwidth, sorry. So you can really zone in. And get things happening. So I'll just reset the EQ in its entirety. And the other thing is EQ damping. Now, this isn't obviously not unique. A lot of plugins have EQ dampening. But I do like that it's not just high and low. It's high, mid, and low. And you can kind of define the ranges in this external control. Everything has an external control. That's an extra level of control, and I really enjoy that. So we're back at the original, and basically you can kind of increase I don't even know how to describe damping, but if you lower these values, you kind of dampen the room a little bit. So say for example, I'll get rid of the highs. You can hear that difference, which is similar to the EQ, but it seems to act in a slightly different way, maybe a little more natural. But I'm not a purist in my sound, and even when working with natural sound and natural instruments, the minute you stick a microphone in front of everything, it will never be the same. As much as we get microphones that don't color the sound and capture what's in front of them, that experience is already not a pure experience. So I'm happy to go all out in order to achieve a great sound. And even a natural sound might be achieved by very unnatural processes. So I'm very happy with that. So yeah, so here we got, and we can, we've really exaggerated the highs. And now all of this comes in handy with a lot of different types of instruments, and I'll get into that. So the same thing with the mid. Can hear that middle part. Put a little high on that. Put the mix down a little bit. You can really intensify the reverb here. And really go to town on it. And you can always... I love this little thing. This kind of... wonder where the mid-high cross tells you kind of where your frequencies are at. And that's pretty great. And the same can be done with the low. You can really get rid of that low end in the reflections, or you can really emphasize it. So that's a lot of the stuff that's available. I haven't even got into the positioner, which is a whole other ball game. I might actually get into it because that'll play into the next little part I want to talk about. But yeah, that's just one impulse response, and the sheer amount of stuff you can do with it. Now imagine a whole plethora of spaces. Now that's pretty cool. Now, if I turn it off as an insert, I can use it as a send, and I've got a couple of sends set up here. Let me close all of that, and this is a send I've got for basically this venue is a it's a concert hall. And actually, I've found this particular one to be one of my favorites because it's very transparent but enhancing and enriching. It feels like a great space to feature the original spirit of the instrument without altering it too much with the impulse response. But see, you can use this as an insert the same way you use as a mix, but without losing any of the volume of the original. So this is it originally, and we'll turn on the. So that's pretty cool. I mean, I can dial it in really. And with a bit of EQ and damping. And a bit of brightness as well. Maybe I'll even increase the reverb time a little bit. Increase the size a little bit. So as an insert, it's pretty cool. As a send, I've got another send set up here, which is this big church kind of reverb. And you see I've got a bit of EQ happening, a bit of damping happening. And if I put that on instead, which I've got here, I'll just dial it back in. I might lower that brightness. There, it sounds more natural already. So. So that's pretty cool. I quite enjoy that, and I just really enjoy this whole just playing with virtual instruments through a really nice reverb, put it in a really nice space, because these instruments already sound great, but they're a lot more fun to play when you've got a nice reverb. To be honest, this is why if you get a lot of workstations and romplers and that kind of thing, those sounds are very dressed up. So yeah. So back to the insert. The other thing I suppose I haven't got into the gated verb, but I'll that's probably a story for another time. The other thing I suppose I want to talk about, well, the positioner and what comes with it. So This is back to bone dry. I've got another instance of this reverb in a kind of a recording environment that they've got here, a broadcast studio. Now the positioner, let me just turn it off for a minute. So this is what it will sound like when you just mix it in. You can really push it back this way. But I've never really found that to be convincing, and that's why there are some positioning plugins that get sold specifically so that, you know, just pushing stuff back with reverb doesn't always do the trick, because you'll still hear a bit of that dry signal, but sometimes if you want to put it in other parts of the stage, panning doesn't always do the trick on its own. So it's a combination of things to actually get that sound there. So that's where the positioner comes in. That's natively included in Altiverb. So I'll turn it on here, and it requires the mix to be on 100%. So I usually put the output level down quite a bit, because with the positioner it kind of gets really loud. So the positioner right here, if I turn it off, so this is what it is mixed. And that actually sounds pretty convincing if you've ever been in a situation like that. If you don't have a reference to that sound, it's like, yeah, I could believe that someone's in that hall playing that piano. But with the positioner, you start kind of being able to play with it. If I turn it off, turn it on, it sounds that a little bit more believable. And obviously it's all a frame of reference. And one of the things I learned about mixing is entirely about context. Something that's close to you and something that's far away, the depth happens because you know that this thing's supposed to be close to you because it's something further away. That's a bad way of saying it, or a terrible way. That's not the full explanation, but a sense of depth happens when there is a difference in that depth and a difference in that perception. And this is kind of where we go. Now we pull it a bit closer. We start to get a bit closer to that stage. Pull it all the way here, and compared to the bone dry, do you kind of see how it sound more believable? That's its believability, I suppose, is the point of this. We push it back a little bit. I find with the positioner, it's easier when you find an impulse response to push it all the way back and then dial it back in, because then you kind of get a sense. Because sometimes not every impulse response works with every instrument in my trial, and the positioner doesn't always play well with everybody. So yeah. So I tend to start here. So that's pretty cool, because it's one of those things where you can also place a piano like this on a stage with an orchestra. And maybe what you need to do is use the plugin or with the other instruments to place them all in the same room and then play with these perspectives. Now, I don't necessarily do that, because the question of the rooms these sounds are all recorded in and how they blend together, I approach it quite differently. I don't necessarily look for unity of space via, like, let's all put them all through the same convolution and that kind of stuff. Versus I try to get the best of everything, because in reality, a lot of productions, they're all recorded in different rooms, and they get matched in a way, but they don't necessarily in ways that complement each other rather than being purists. Again, I'm not taking a purist approach to this, and not a lot of people do, to be honest. The most purist approach is to place microphones all around, record that, and present it as is. But even then, you'll need to EQ, because then you have to adjust for the microphone bias. But that's a whole other story. But this is what I'm talking about here. Now, as a point of comparison, I'll turn on the Spitfire Orchestral Grand. Now, this is recorded... Let me just get it on top. This is recorded in a hall. Actually, I'll turn up another one, the Strezov Lip Piano, because that's also recorded in a hall. And you have a choice of those microphones. So if you have a listen to this... Now I'll get the Alicia Keys that we've put in a hall. Can push it back a little bit in that space. Now, obviously, it's not going to sound the same because we're using a different piano, different brand, and a different space altogether, and a different recording chain. See, a lot of the stuff, I'm not necessarily going to ever match it, but I can make it complement each other really well. So this is what naturally the Spitfire Grand sounds like. Now, the Orchestral Grand, if I put on the close mic here, you'll have a point of reference to the dry Alicia Keys. So this is what it sounds like dry. So we're already working with that. We're already working with that point of difference. It's a bit more. And it's also, mic'd in that hall. It's close mic'd, but in that hall. So you still get a little bit of that tail happening. But you got to appreciate this point of difference to actually then go and compare them. Because if you're trying to make Alicia Keys sound like the Spitfire Orchestral Grand, you can try, and you can possibly maybe get a little close, but you're better off doing something more interesting rather than approaching things in a purist manner. So I'll turn that reverb back on. And what I might actually do is I'll turn on... I've got a copy of Cine Symphony Light, just the strings happening, and I'll play them together. Let me just make sure all the MIDI inputs. So this is Cine Symphony Light. I'll just put on the... I've got Altiverb on that as well. But if I turn it off, I'll just turn the reverb in the preset back on. And I'll put the Alicia Keys piano. I'm just turning... So that's... Let me try to place the piano a little... Now the piano is a bit ahead of the orchestra. Now I haven't actually really matched the halls or anything, or tried to complement, but I'm just, as an example. Sorry about the audio interruptions. It's just the recording all this stuff with as minimum latency as possible sometimes makes the system crack. So I find that really interesting. And if I try to compare to the lip piano here, which also has microphone options, I need to close all of this down. There it is. So I've got a stage mic and a hall mic, and you can really kind of hear that space quality, that low end of the space. There's no close mic in here, so I'll push that piano back. Now here that space is actually quite brighter in the lip piano, so I might try just using these controls, the brightening and maybe the reverb damping. And I might put the reverb time down a little bit, just to have a point of comparison. Could probably even do with a bit with a bit. Sometimes it seems like I sometimes look at my EQ and I'm like, why are you doing some of these drastic measures? Sometimes you just got to play it by ear. Obviously, not everything will have to be boosted so high, but sometimes it depends. If you know your signal and you know what you're working with, then it can work. Now, obviously, you've got a different space here, so I'm not necessarily going to try to match it all. I've got the close mic engaged on here. But see, like, we've got these two native, that already sound different, these two natively recorded hall pianos. So we can have all these different flavors, and you can really try to get into it. So let me just put all this stuff back. With the positioner. Now the other beautiful thing is, you don't have to stick with the stereo. Because I've got a stereo signal and I'm using the stereo impulse. If I get rid of the stereo link edits, I can move the piano exactly everywhere I want within the stereo. So because the piano is already, stereo right in your face. It feels like this. It feels like the high notes come from the right and the low notes come from the left. But say, for example, I want to get it all to the left, all to the back of the stage. So it's all the way back there. And what I've noticed in real life and in productions is, like, when things are further away, they have less of a sense of panning. So sometimes you'll push something back and it'll start to sound a bit more centered, because the further the sounds are, the more centered they can get, because you can't really tell exactly which dimension, which part of the horizon they're coming from. So yeah, and you can go all the way to the right. You can combine them, kind of thing, or you can push them all the way back. So now this is all on right next to me. If I'm like the I don't know, someone in the orchestra and I'm sitting on just to the left of the piano, this is what I'm hearing. So yeah, and you can really widen the stereo image if you want. I try to not mess with widening the stereo image too much generally, because things start to fall apart when you play with that. Unless you're careful, unless that's the effect you're going for. But I like to be able to keep things as good as possible, not as natural as possible, but usually they're presented in one of the most optimal ways, and maybe you can tweak things here and there, but sometimes I like to stick with what's there, only because when I've tried to go outside of it, either I haven't had the skill to be able to make it work, or the effect in and of itself was just too much for... I was trying to do too much with something that didn't need that much. So yeah, so that's something. If we have a look at the IRs themselves, which I really find interesting. So the IR, and in the positioner this really shows, this IR is recorded at 14 meters away. So when I've got the piano up here, and the positioner, this is already at 14 meters. If I push it further back, now I don't know what the depth of the space is meant to be. So I've got 14 meters up to here, and then an extra however many meters down to there. There are several options here where you can... This is at 10 meters, and this is at 6 meters. So it's already... there's already several, for most of these spaces, several distances recorded. And sometimes the distance you record something from can really affect the tone. It's not just about distance, it's also about tone. And sometimes that's why mic selections in sample libraries can be so important, because it's not only about how far away the mic is, it's also about what the mic is actually capturing at these distances and kind of what it seems to focus on. And that's actually what I've tended to find. So with a lot of these impulse responses, it can be interesting to try all these different distances and then play with the positioner. So I'm really fond of that idea of just these several distances, and you can also get an idea of the tail, the length of the reverb length. One more thing that I've really enjoyed is that sometimes you struggle with a certain sound, and you love the original sound, but it's bone dry, and you put it into the space of the positioner, and the quality that attracted you in the sound can start to get lost. Now, if you want to, you could just use it as an insert effect or use the mix control right here. But what they've also provided is a way to change the color, so you could get the color of the impulse response or the color of the original sample. So here, for example, this is the color of my original piano. And with the impulse response in the positioner, if I turn off the early reflections and tail, you hear that difference quite clearly. Now, the difference isn't too massive with this specific impulse response, but say I really, really don't want to mess with the tone of the Alicia Keys. Put it all down to flat. I'll put the outs a little bit. And with the positioner, with the early reflections, they'll do the rest of the work. But you can start to really shape things the way you want to shape them. And that is really, really incredibly awesome for me. Because sometimes I struggle with that. I love the original quality of what I've recorded or what the sample library, but the positioning and the reverb starts to take that away. And being able to have that control is mind-blowing. And the funny thing is, I had Altiverb for quite a while after the guy sent it to me, but I just kept discovering new things about it, and stumbling across new parts of it that I was like, whoa, you could do that. Oh, you could do that. Oh, you could do that. In fact, only yesterday did I realize, or a couple of days ago, did I realize that it had a little search function. I didn't look there, but you can look for impulse responses that way. So say if I type in church, I have all these things that have church in them, and that might be church in the description or something. If I say wooden, there's all these different wood things. If I say cellar, got cellars right here. Museum. Why have caps lock? There's a museum part right there. I remember this. There's a pyramid. There's one of the pyramids in Egypt. And it's just a whole bunch of things. So even that in a reverb, this reverb just feels kind of, in the way it functions, it feels like the plugin equivalent of Omnisphere. Because Omnisphere is so deep and simple at the same time. And Altiverb seems to do that because it supplies all these different things and all these different ways of interacting with it. But you can just open it up and go, and you won't be lost. At least that's what I found. I've opened it up, went, oh, this is great. I can work with it straight away. So that's a whole lot of time I spent on the piano. I'll open up the Malmsio piano. I don't know how to pronounce that, but this is a really beautiful. It's an old sample, but they have this little dream piano preset, and I think this. I'm fairly sure this is the preset that I think Hans Zimmer said that he actually used this on Inception. So if you play that. So it's like, so it's really cool. Now we'll mix in a bit of Altiverb, just with the mix control. Got the King's Chapel, the King's College Chapel, which is a church environment. And we're off to the races. Really take your time with it. So I found it really, really beautiful. It's really great if you just want to have this this great kind of sound, this great just scoring piano, this these really emotional moments. You can have something like this. It's like, what was the thing? There's a little bit from Arrow. This is from the TV show Arrow. So that's really beautiful with with the reverb on top. And the thing about reverb is like it can be the mix isn't even that much. I've got 20% or something. It doesn't need that much to do that much. And sometimes it can be interesting to try. Even I think no one really, or in my circles anyway, not a lot of people talk about the stuff that comes with complete and stuff like this. Like, this is an old library a few years ago now. The New York Grand, which is, let me turn off the send. It can sound really beautiful. It's really poppy, so it's like if you start playing stuff like, just turn it down a little bit. So that's pretty cool. Now, I'll use one of the Altiverbs. Oh no, I'll use the other one. I'll use the FX1, which is the concert hall part. This is like. Now, if I put on the insert, actually, I can't remember what I had on it. Oh yeah, the Garden Hall. I really like this one. So it's a nice sound. Now, for me, it's not a particularly impressive piano, but I found that it can have its uses. And really, again, it's all contextual. Context is king of everything. So yes, that's that reverb with the New York Grand, which is a Garden Hall. I'm a big fan of Native Instruments, the Giants, which again here I have with the. And I'm not going to go into, the Giant in and of itself, but it's. This is all. It can actually sound really beautiful, soft, because you have a lot of control over the dynamic range and the softness of the tone. So this is, I usually start off with the Giant pop preset and then work with it from there. But I've turned off the inherent reverb, so this is all kind of the dry signal. And I'll turn on the Altiverb and dial it in. Again, this is the big church reverb. Where's there? Oh, the pedal is making a lot of noise. In the anatomy, turn the pedal. It's the strings. There we go. Now with the pianos, you're using this as an insert effect or as a send effect, but not necessarily making use of the positioner most of the time, because in a lot of things, and definitely in my own music, the piano is front and center. A lot of the times I'm using the piano as the main instrument. Sometimes because I'm a bit lazy, but a lot of times because I come up with a lot of stuff on the piano. and it feels a little more natural that way. I also love the the Giant for the resonance that you can really turn all the way up. So yeah, and as you can see, I've got a lot of control here. I've engaged the damping, I've engaged the EQ, and can even engage the brightness if you want. There's a lot that can be done there. So yes, that's that's the reverb with the Giant. Sometimes you need to get a little crazy with a drinking piano. Actually, I had a project last year where I had to provide some music as a music in a bar scene, and I was basically the pianist in the background, the drunk pianist, the drunk out of practice pianist in the background, and that was the scene. So the drinking piano from Sound Iron is fantastic for that. Like, you can't fake this. You have to really record the real thing, and I really like what they did there. So, like, so that's the natural sound. Even some of that ring out is from the original piano, because it's battered, it's broken, and people have broken bottles on it or whatever whatever happens wherever it was. But it's not in the best shape, and that's the best shape you would want it in, because you want something that's beat up. Like it played like the Black Sails theme, the piano part's like. So yeah, now you might want to place this somewhere. So what I've done here with the Altiverb is Altiverb has a heck of a lot of spaces. This is the best space I found for it. It was in the post-production, actually. It was a workshop, atelier. So if this is what it sounds like dry, I'll turn it up, and I've got the positioner engaged here to keep it front and center, but still in the space. So now it feels a lot more natural, a lot more, that's where it's supposed to be. I struggled a little bit actually trying to find some space for this one to live in, because everything's so beautiful and stuff, and that you actually kind of want it to sound like it's in this bar and it's this dingy place, and it's that that not a lot of people go there. Actually, no, that maybe a lot of people go there, but it's not going to be pristine, and it's going to be in this space. And also, you can do quite a lot here, but with the positioner, it's put it right at the back of the room. You're a bit further away. That's what you might have to do in the post-production process. If I imagine they could have used Altiverb in the project that I worked on to put it at the back of the room. Now they might have not, because in context you might have not had that many reflections in a crowded scene, and I might not even need to use the tail, for example, or can lower the tail, or lower the reverb time. So, out of practice pianist in a bar. And there we are, back here. So yeah, so that drinking pianos, that that'll get you there. So yes, that's some piano stuff. Now I did a lot with pianos because I'm really enjoy them, and piano sample libraries for someone who plays piano, you can almost never have enough because everyone will do something completely different, and even for someone who doesn't play piano primarily necessarily, but sometimes it depends on the situation and the project, and one project will work better than the other.